Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for checking out this channel. And this being our first video, I want to introduce myself by telling you a little bit about what this channel is for. And the goal of this channel is to take debates that are very contentious, argumentative, acrimonious, and see if we can either find a middle ground or moderate the debate or synthesize the viewpoints. To introduce myself a little bit, I'm an editor of a couple of different academic journals. I consider myself a science enthusiast, and I'd like to tackle a debate that's really contentious and maybe the most argumentative, hostile debate that has ever raged in human thought. And that's the debate between science and religion. Now, the goal of this little discussion is just to provide some jumping off points and some topics for maybe further thought and further discussion. I know this is a huge topic, and this is meant to be sort of a multi-part conversation about this. So we're just going to do a very brief introduction today and try to touch the basics of some of the issues that I'd like to get into. So here are some of the points that I'd like to address. The first thing is we're going to talk about some critiques of the debate. So we're going to sort of critique each side and offer some overall criticisms of the discussion in general and how this discussion has been conducted in modern times. The next point is to try to offer any synthesis and say, are there ways that these very different, disparate viewpoints can be sort of synthesized together? And then I know this debate has raged for centuries, and it's as old as human thought, really. But we're going to ask the challenging question of, can we add anything new to this debate? All right, so why am I talking about this, and why do I feel that I'm an authority? Well, I'm really not an authority. It's just that I've watched a lot of videos on this debate. I consider myself an enthusiast for sort of watching and observing human thought, and I'd like to talk about this just because it's an interesting topic. It's a very difficult and challenging topic to synthesize, so if we can offer some interesting insights on this topic, we can offer some very interesting insights on pretty much anything. So my perspective on the debate between science and religion is, even though I'm a science enthusiast, I'm really not sure what side I fall on. And sometimes I watch different speakers and I think that they make really good points on both sides of the debate. So I'm very much unassigned, and maybe that gives me a bit of a unique, neutral perspective. But here are some folks that I enjoy watching. Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Lawrence Krauss, Sean Carroll, John Lennox is a great mathematician from Oxford. I really enjoy his perspectives on the subject of whether or not there is a God. But honestly, watching the conversation and watching YouTube videos, I do feel very unsatisfied, and I sometimes look at this debate as something that really could be very interesting to watch, but it just doesn't feel as intellectually and maybe even spiritually nourishing. And I should say that in this discussion, when I use the word spiritual, I'm using that word in the very broadest definition you could possibly conceptualize. All right, so first we're going to start with some critiques of atheism. And this is maybe one of the most, I think, while atheism can be criticized by folks on the religious side, religious apologetics, and religious apologists, this is not meant to be, a negation of some of the points that atheism makes. It's really meant to be a criticism of the community and how the debate is conducted. But this is kind of meant to be suggestions for improvement rather than arguments against the perspective. So the first thing, and this is maybe the third most important thing that I'll talk about in this talk, and that's where is the community? And there really isn't much of one. And this may seem like a minor point, but I think it's really important. Um, Community and spirituality and religious participation really are really important in our mental health and even for our physical health. And this is a meta-analysis that was conducted in 2000 that looked at the physical, mental, and even mortality benefits of participating in religious communities. And it's almost without debate to say that participation in a religious community makes you a healthier person both mentally, psychologically, emotionally, and there's really good evidence that it even prolongs your life. So I'm not saying that you should participate in a religious community or a belief system that you don't agree with just to get the health benefits. But I do think that there needs to be more support of people who leave religious communities and maybe a safety net provided. Now, there are interesting organizations that have sprouted up to sort of provide a network, a community, and even a culture for people who leave religious organizations. There's Sunday Assembly, and there's a lot of other sort of non-denominational and without sect sort of organizations that are popping up around the country and around the world that are meant to sort of supplant some of the benefits that you get socially from participating in religious organizations. I think these organizations are really great. And to be fair, I have heard atheists talk a little bit about this point, but I think it's a point that's under-recognized, that a lot of people who are in atheist communities should really put more resources and more effort into providing a network, a social organization, and a way of participating and getting community, even if you're not affiliated with a religious organization, especially for people who are leaving religious doctrines, religious communities. Those people really do need to have a safety network. And this isn't something that's talked about enough in atheist circles. And again, I think that's one of the most important points that I could make in this talk, is that social organizations need to be provided for people leaving religious communities. All right, the other point that I have is that sometimes when I hear atheists talk about religion and why atheism is a more valid viewpoint, it sort of sets up a straw man. You know, I've read the Bible, I've read the Old Testament, I've read the New Testament, and I think if you use that or any specific religious text as a supplantation for any kind of religious thought, then you're kind of really setting up a straw man. By the way, a straw man fallacy, if you're not familiar with it, is when you take the opposing viewpoint and you kind of portray it in its weakest form to argue against it. So I would love to hear atheists talk more about the existence of a deity in general and get less wrapped up in the Old Testament or the New Testament or specific religious doctrines. And the reason why is because some of those texts were written thousands of years ago. I don't think anyone could have anticipated that human thought would evolve to be as critical as it is right now. But I think that's one argument that, I sometimes see a lot of refutations of the Bible. And I think the Bible is an interesting document. I think it's culturally relevant. I think there are some really great insights in it. And I think casting it as sort of a straw man does a disservice in the debate. And the last thing I think that I'd like to say about atheism is a lot of the authors that I've read, Sam Russell's a good example. It's easier to tear things down than it is to create a new basis for spiritual thought. And again, I'm using spiritual thought and spiritual philosophy as terms and phrases that you could imagine the most broad sense possible. So I'm not necessarily saying that yes, humans have a soul. Maybe I'll talk about that in a different talk, but I'm really meaning these things very broadly. And I would like to see, rather than people just taking down religious schools of thought in their atheist argumentation, I would love to see more effort being put towards, what are some tenets of spiritual thought or spiritual philosophy that are valid, that are useful, and what can we prop up rather than just tearing things down. I think that's an important point. So, some issues now, turning our focus onto religious apologetics. There are a lot of issues, okay, right? And each religion has its subset of apologists who will make arguments saying why their religion is valid. And talking about all of those arguments is definitely beyond the scope of what we can address in just a brief conversation. So these are some points that I think are important to make for this topic, and maybe will hopefully provide some novelty if you haven't seen this before. Now, I know that people who are very dogmatic in their religious beliefs are probably not going to get that much out of this talk. Probably very much in the same way, if you're very dogmatic in your beliefs towards atheism, you probably also will not get a lot out of watching this conversation. But I'm hopeful that if you're like me and you're sort of undecided and what I would call spiritually curious, that you will get something out of this. And my hope is that maybe there are people from each camp who will find some useful insights here. So again, this is going to be a very, very interesting discussion about my points against religious apologists. And the first point isn't so much a criticism as it is an observation. A lot of religious advocates that I've heard focus on describing things that are really amazing in the universe and saying, how could that work without a deity? And people point towards like the development of the evolution of the eye, or the development and evolution of the kidney as just such remarkable things that how could you create those things without invoking the existence of a deity? And this is a point that I've seen in a lot of young folks that I interact with. And the reason why, and I think this point is under-recognized, is the human brain is really meant to conceptualize numbers that you can sort of see and deal with and that are tangible. And that's because of the way evolution has worked and the way evolution has guided our brain. When it comes to thinking about and conceptualizing millions or even billions, that's just beyond the scope of what we can imagine and what we can conceptualize. So I think this is an important point because it's okay to look at the universe and say, there's no way this could be created, without a deity, because the universe is really amazing. But you have to remember that that kind of wonderment is something that's normal. Your mind is just not meant to think about things that evolve over a time scale of millions or even billions of years. Your mind is really meant to think about things as even several hundred is a lot and very hard to conceptualize. So I think this is a point that, is an observation, not so much a criticism, but let's sort of acknowledge the limitation of our brains when we try and conceptualize the time scale that are, geological time scales or even cosmological time scales. This is just sort of an illustration. This is hundreds of butterflies. Now, there's a lot of butterflies here, but the number is only hundreds. But you can look at this image and just see that already, you're losing your ability to focus on individuals just because there's so many butterflies in this picture. This is a picture of just one frame from the Million Man March. Now, there were several thousands of people there, so this is a picture of maybe thousands of people, but definitely not millions, and definitely not a million. But just looking at this picture, you can see that, even in the scope of thousands, this is not even something we encounter on an everyday basis in our usual experience. And then the idea of millions is just almost impossible to conceptualize. This is an image of the Hubble Deep Field, and when it comes to thinking about things that evolve over millions or even billions of years, it's just beyond the scope of thought. So it's okay to look at these structures, to look at evolutionary trends and say, there's almost no way that I could imagine this working. That's an okay observation, and that contributes, I think, to scientists who look at the universe, who look at life biologically, and who look at the cosmos with a lot of amazement and with a lot of wonderment. Um, and another issue that I have with religious apologists is a lot of discussion is made in the religious side of the debate on how the universe is created or how humans were brought into existence. This is sort of the God of the gaps, and that's how it's pejorated against by atheist camps. But I do think that really, why even have to think about that there would be a provable God? Like, why do you have to have proof for a God? And why do you have to say that the mechanistics of the universe prove that there's a God that exists? I don't think that's really a point that I think should be focused on by religious apologists. And moreover, why would you set yourself up to debate science, the most cohesive discipline of human thought? Why frame the debate, for that matter, as science versus religion? Now, this may seem like I'm advocating for science, but I do think that scientific and religious thought can be complementary. And this is the point where we get to sort of synthesize the disparate viewpoints, hopefully a little bit. How can they be complementary? Well, I think that you can think of science as the study of the mechanisms, the study of how the universe came to be, how humans came to be. And you can think of religious and spiritual thought as a discipline that considers the why of existence. Now, this is maybe the second most important point that I'm going to make in this talk. So it's an important observation to me. So I'm going to emphasize it on even another slide. And the point that I want to make with this is that I think it's useful to think of science as the study of the how, the mechanism, the nuts and bolts, the different steps of evolution, and to think about spiritual and religious thought as meant to answer a very different question that can maybe be informed by the first question, but the question of, the why. Why are we here? I think if you understand how we came into existence, if you understand how the universe came into existence, that maybe informs the question of why we're here, but I don't think it completely answers it. And let me explain this in a different way. I think a lot of religious apologists try to prove the existence of God, but if you think about it, if you are the deity that created the universe, I don't think you would leave around evidence to prove that you exist, right? You would probably want people to have some choice, to have some, faith, and you'd want there to be, I don't know, maybe some, component of spiritual choosing in that debate. I don't think you would necessarily want people to say, oh yeah, here's the evidence. Or if you did, and if you said, I want to create a universe where there's clear evidence proving my existence, I think if you did do that, then the evidence would really be unequivocal. Like it would be like your name written in the sky in very big letters, which obviously that proof doesn't exist. So, but I think you can synthesize the religious and scientific debates by saying that, maybe there's interesting insights on how the universe was created, how humans came to be, provided by science. And separate from that, there are interesting insights that can be thought of from spiritual or religious thought that can tell us maybe why we're here, which is a sort of similar question, but it's a different question in a lot of important ways. So hopefully I haven't belabored that point too much, but again, I think it's one of the most important points that I'll make in this discussion, and I haven't heard this echoed by many other thinkers. So, are there any other ways that we can find a synthesis between the camp of religion and science? And I know that we don't have much time left, but I think the answer to this is I don't know, maybe. But I can think of one small example that we can, which is a way that we can maybe have some insight into scientific revelations and religious or spiritual thought. Now, here's the Milky Way. Now, this has billions of stars, okay? And I'm sorry, millions of stars. But it also has billions or maybe even trillions of planets. So this is massive, and this is just our galaxy. And already when we think about our galaxy, it's something that's really beyond any conception of human counting. This is the Hercules Corona Borealis supercluster of galaxies. So we're talking now here about hundreds of millions of galaxies. So this is maybe the most massive structure that we've identified in the known universe, and it's a galaxy supercluster. And so the amount of space, matter, and time that this occupies is really massively beyond the scope of human imagination. And by the way, even though this is a massive, massive structure, it's really only 1/60th, 1 out of 60 of the observable universe. So I guess the point I'm making is that are there any spiritual insights that we can gain from reflecting on the massiveness of the universe that's beyond the scope of human thought? And I can think of one. And that is that if we live in the universe that's so vast, so much beyond our comprehension, how can we really think that we know everything about it and that we have everything wrapped up in terms of our conclusion of how it came to be here and why it's here? And that's an important thing, maybe the most important thing that I'll say in this conversation. And that, that because I think that shows that there is spiritual thought that remains to be discovered that hasn't yet been written about. There's scientific revelations that haven't yet been uncovered as well. So I think that means two things. One of the things that revelation means is that there's still a lot of ground to cover in both sides of the debate. And then the other, I think, important point this makes is that our human minds are really tiny compared to the scope of the universe. And so we should be humble in our thoughts. So, and maybe this is the most important point that I'll make. No matter what you believe, be humble in your conclusions and be kind in your conversations with others. So if you're tackling this debate, just, think about your own humility. Think about the scope of your own mind compared to the scope of the universe, and be kind to others when they express their viewpoints. All right, well, thanks very much for watching this. This is our first ever video, so I'm really grateful for the support. Consider supporting the channel by liking, subscribing, getting notifications, and commenting. I would love to hear your comments on what we can talk about next. What are some other contentious topics, or what are some deeply philosophical questions that you'd like us to tackle? I promise to thoroughly review any topics that you post up, that you comment on, and really review a lot of literature about those topics, and then provide insights that I think are a bit more novel or haven't been discussed widely yet. And then this is a new channel, so we really would appreciate your support. All right, thanks everybody for watching, and hopefully we'll be posting more videos soon.